The NHL roster frenzy is well underway. The draft looms on the horizon. Free agency not too far in the distance. Who's buying? Who's selling? Who's going to actually get to market? And a whole lot of chaos on today's edition of Locked On NHL.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL. I am Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers, and that is my good friend and co-host of the Locked On Penguins podcast, Hunter Hodies. We want to thank everyone that is making Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. With so much to get to, we're going to do our best to get as much information thrown at you as we possibly can in our 30-minute time allotment here. We are going to start with the buyers, the teams that we know want to make moves, why they need to make moves, who they might be interested in. In our second segment, we're going to pivot towards the trade market, talk about some of the names that are out there, why they might be available, why some make more sense than others. And then in our final segment, we'll talk about some of the stuff that's already happened. Jonathan Toews signing in Winnipeg, some of the trades. Evander Kane got traded about an hour ago. We'll talk about that from a Canucks and an Oilers perspective, some of the moves we might like to see. So to start things out, and this is almost always the case, it's a great time to be a seller. When you get to free agency, whether you're a player trying to sell your talent or you're a team with assets that other people might be interested in, this is when everyone is at their most liquid. Everyone has their most flexibility the week leading up to the draft. Because if you trade your draft picks this week, everybody knows what the value is because they have a slot assigned to them. And also, most teams are going to have a little bit more cap space than they would in season because they have expiring contracts. So this is generally where we see the bigger moves happen, is around the draft into the early parts of the summer. Now, there are outliers. Sometimes bigger names get traded September, October. Erik Karlsson was right before the season started when he got traded to San Jose. But by and large, we're going to see a lot of activity over the next few weeks because the market conditions make it more conducive, and there are a million ways we can take this. We know more than anything, teams this time of year that are trying to buy, they want credibility really badly. They want to say, look what we did. We went out and got player X. We got player Y. They've done this and that over here and over there. If you're a team out there that is a little bit desperate, like the Maple Leafs, like the Rangers, maybe like the Bruins, maybe like the Flyers or the Blue Jackets to some degree, who just want some credibility, there is plenty of opportunity to maybe improve your team over the next 2 weeks. You can also really mess yourself up over the next 2 weeks.
I am excited to see some of the overpayments now that the cap is really going up this year, and then going forward as well, Nick, when the cap gets even higher. We talked about this a little bit, how you might have to evaluate some contracts a bit differently now that the cap is going up, but that also means you might see some even crazier overpayments for some depth forwards in free agency. You know, we've seen quite a few over the years, but I feel like this year we're going to see some deals that make you go even more like, ooh, I'm not really too sure about that. I think it could be a buyout coming in year 2 or year 3 of that contract. And, you know, you mentioned that point about Erik Karlsson, and he was traded to Pittsburgh, Nick, in literally August 2 years ago. So moves still happen in August. It's just not as rare because everyone is at the cabin, going to the beach, fishing, all that stuff. For the most part, teams really want to get down to business this week, next week with free agency, and then the week or two after that going into mid-July. I think right around mid to late July, not like right around that time frame, that's when I think almost all teams really want their roster set going into the next season. And if teams miss out on some of the top free agents and this class is not really that good, they're going to look to the trade market. And that's why I think a team like the team I cover, the Pittsburgh Penguins, I think that's why they're in such a good spot going into this, because you keep seeing all the reports out there that they're the only true seller. They have pieces to sell if they want. You know, Erik Karlsson's name is out there. Brian Rust's name's out there. Rickard Rakell's name is out there. Teams that want to take the next step are interested in these types of players. Also, teams that are already contenders are interested in these players. And the Penguins, they don't have to just take the first offer they get. They can kind of wait this out a little bit going into free agency to see if some of these teams miss out on some of their top targets, like a Marner, like a Nick Ehlers, like a Sam Bennett, if he even gets to market, Brad Marchand. And, you're going to also see other desperate teams that are really trying to get back to the playoffs, potentially do some big things. We've already seen the Ducks be a bit aggressive this offseason. They made the Zegras trade earlier this week. We'll get to that a little bit later. I think they're lining up to do something pretty big. I think Utah wants to do something pretty big this offseason. They keep being connected to Mitch Marner, though I think at this point it sounds like Vegas is the favorite to get him, which, Nick, you have said that on the Locked On NHL show, that Marner, that you feel like he's going to go to Vegas. I said Carolina, so you might be right on that if it eventually ends up being right, but Utah wants to do something big. How about Detroit, man? Steve Yzerman, I think this might be finally the make or break year for him in Detroit. You still haven't made the playoffs. If you don't do it this year, and I think he's going to be aggressive, I think it's probably time for the Red Wings to cut the can with him, just because it hasn't been working out. He hasn't been able to get them to the playoffs at this rate. So, teams like that, again, almost all these teams, even Chicago and San Jose, I don't think they're going to be good next year, but they want to be better. They're going to be buying at least a little bit in free agency to surround their young talent with some veteran players. Bedard, he could use that a little bit. Celebrini, that's the next step, I think, for teams like that. But for someone like the Penguins, who they're doing this rebuild on the fly, they're not really interested right now in going into the free agency, overpaying for players 30 plus. They want younger players coming in, whether it's the draft or whether it's via these trades, that can really play, potentially be on their next teams that are contenders once they get their next stars in. But for almost every other team, they're going to be buying in some way, shape, or form.
And one of the interesting components of this is, generally speaking, the middle class of free agent has been getting squeezed more and more over time, where if you're the big star, if you're Bobrovsky, Panarin, Mitch Marner, your number is going to get met. You will have suitors for you. And if you're down at the bottom, if you're in the bargain bin, you're Corey Perry, you're Connor Brown, you're going to get taken care of because teams are going to be willing to take a chance on you. Where the market hasn't really adapted, or I should say where players are really getting squeezed, is in that middle class, a second pair guy, a third liner. Teams, at least good teams, are going to be more inclined to say, we're going to try and find that somewhere else. We're going to take a dart throw on a guy at $1.5 million as opposed to you at $4.5 million. Even though you're definitely better on face value, we think we can extract more value from a cheaper player, and as somebody who watched the Oilers try and do this last summer with Skinner and Arvidsson, depressed assets. Arvidsson coming off of a major back injury. He only played 15 regular season games 2 years ago for the Kings. He came in for 2 years, 4.5. He looks like he's going to be a cap casualty following Evander Kane out the door. And Jeff Skinner, he came in off a buyout. When a player gets bought out, that's telling everybody else around the league, this guy is a depreciated asset. He needs to rebuild his value. It didn't really work out for either guy in Edmonton, which I do find interesting, even though on face value, their numbers were fine in the roles they played. Neither guy really excelled or really rebuilt their value all that much. So I'll be curious to see what happens in that respect. And as far as the Oilers go, real quick before we move on, they still have to make another move or two if they want to improve their roster.
It's probably going to be Arvidsson, funny enough. They just dealt Evander Kane to the Canucks. Why Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin decided to help arguably their biggest division rival, I have no idea. Very strange. You just take on his full salary and you give back a draft pick. And yeah, that draft pick's probably not going to amount to much of anything, but you're still taking on his full salary and you're helping out a division rival for reasons. Just don't understand that. But the Oilers, they'll still have to move Arvidsson, Nick, because Draisaitl's cap hit goes way up.
Yeah, 8.5 to 14 million.
Yeah, that's right. And then Evan Bouchard's contract's going to be probably 10 million per. And then, of course, they have the McDavid extension to deal with. And of course, also, they got to figure out what else to do at the bottom of their lineup.
So on that note, if you are curious how the Oilers are going to make this math work, this is the Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers. I talked about in depth how the Oilers are going to build a competitive roster with three guys, McDavid, Draisaitl, and Bouchard, likely making about $42-43 million. And that's conservative. That's if Bouchard comes in at $10.5 million and McDavid comes in at 17.5 or 18. As McDavid, if he wants to, he can go all the way up to 19.5 because I think that's what the 20% max is. It's about $19.5 million. So the Oilers are absolutely going to feel the squeeze. And this is a team that probably needs a top six forward, that probably needs a starting goalie. those are expensive. Those are really expensive archetypes. So speaking of expensive, coming up next on today's edition of Locked On NHL, Hunter and I are going to pivot to the trade market, which is lively, but at the same time, we're still waiting for bigger shoes to drop. We're still waiting for that big domino to fall. Whatever it is, we don't know, but there are a lot of interesting restricted free agents out there, and we're going to hit on it next, coming up on today's edition of Locked On NHL. Do you ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning for a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your personal CFO to give you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is so much more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you are building wealth. Something I was definitely guilty of before I started using Monarch was not saving enough. But once I signed up for Monarch, started putting money aside every week, Monarch helped me stay on track, paid for my vacation in August, which I cannot wait to get to because it's about 100 degrees and I'd like to be in 70 degrees and less humidity. So if you're ready to take control of your finances, you can visit monarchmoney.com. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout and get 50% off your first year subscription. One more time, that's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out with Hunter and I on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL in the midst of what is a slow-burning frenzy is the way I would describe it. We're getting pockets of activity. We had Trevor Zegras the other day. We had Evander Kane this morning. We know there are a lot of restricted free agents out there. Marco Rossi, Bowen Byram, Keandre Miller. There are a lot of interesting pieces that are out there.
JJ Peterka as
well. They're more than just that. Jordan Spence of the Kings is someone I know a lot of people are excited about. Matthias McKelly is out there. Barrett Hayden's a restricted free agent as well. There are a lot of interesting guys in that market. And generally, those are opportunities for teams to improve while taking a chance. Because generally speaking, good players don't get to unrestricted free agency. For the most part, the best players don't get there because by 25 or 26, most NHL teams have determined what you are already. And if you're good enough, they're going to suck it up and give you that money. They might have to deal with the consequences down the road. They might have to juggle some hoops. But the examples I always give, and the one I come back to a lot, is you think about how Tampa Bay prioritized certain components of their core. And they let a lot of guys leave. They let Alex Killorn leave. They let Andre Palat leave. They traded Sergachev. They traded McDonough. They traded Ross Colton. They traded Miles. They lost so many guys over the years through free agency or trades because they knew we need to keep Cirelli. We need to keep Hagel. We need to keep Point. I mean, they had the binary choice. They chose Jake Gensel over Steven Stamkos. They said, we know we need to get better and we need to make this choice. And they looked very smart in moving on from Steven Stamkos last year and getting a player of Jake Gensel's caliber to replace him. And that's really what I find so interesting about this time of year. It's one of the rare opportunities you get no nonsense appraisals of talent from general managers. Because if a GM is telling you, we would rather let this guy go than maneuver to keep them, that's telling you something about that guy. Whether it's they're declining or they're already depreciated, if a guy gets to unrestricted free agency, barring weird exceptions, Mitch Marner definitely an extreme outlier in that case, but for the most part, guys who get there are not that caliber of player.
And that's the thing, man, with Stamkos, that's a franchise cornerstone. And
that's one of, if not the best player in the history of that team.
1,000,000%. And they said, hey, we love everything you did for us. You've won championships with us, but we have to make this hard decision and we have to replace you with what we feel like is a better goal scorer. And hey, they looked smart for this past season with the way Gensel played in their top six. And then, when you look at what Stamkos did with Nashville, I'm not blaming Stamkos for signing with Nashville. And, we thought Nashville was going to be a playoff team. I don't think anyone saw them being one of the worst teams in the league this past season. But the trade market, you're right. Like we've seen pockets of action. We talked about the Evander Kane trade a little bit earlier. Again, I don't really know what Vancouver is doing there. You have the Trevor Zegras trade. And honestly, Pat Verbeek is such a weird GM to me. There's times where I'm like, okay, I see the vision. And then there's other times where it feels like he's getting pantsed by Chris Drury. He only gets a second-round pick back for Zegras. And, Ryan Poehling, fine. Fourth-round pick next year, whatever. But the only thing you're getting back is a top 45 pick this year. I don't know. I know his value is a lot lower right now compared to where it was, but I feel like you could have squeezed a little bit more value out of that deal, in my opinion. But the Sabres, what they're going to do this summer is really fascinating. Peterka's name is out there. I don't get the sense that they want to do this because I think they're spooked. And what I mean by that is, look at all the players, Nick, that they have traded over the last few years that have gone on to win Stanley Cups.
Reinhart, Montour,
O'Reilly.
Pretty good players.
Yeah.
Pretty good players.
And I think right now that management staff and the ownership especially are really scared that if they trade him, he is going to go on to be a much better player elsewhere just because of the history that you have seen with trading all these players. Like you see all the memes of the former Sabre players and how many cups they have. Well, but with Peterka, though, it sounds like he might want to leave, but that doesn't mean the Sabres have to trade him. We'll have to see if someone offer sheets him. I think that's definitely a distinct possibility. Nick, we've seen the Rangers floated out there as a team that could really send an offer sheet at some point. But Peterka, half the league should probably be in on him, but I just don't know if the Sabres really want to do it because they're spooked about the last trades that they've made with some of their really good players where they've just come out on the losing end. Bowen Byram, now that's something I could see them doing because I like Byram, but away from Dahlin, he's not as effective. I think Dahlin really carried him this past season. You look at the underlyings when Byram is away from Dahlin this past season, it's a pretty stark drop off. Marco Rossi, his name is out there. I think Minnesota is mainly looking for a hockey type trade in return where they can, get equal value, if not better value. But I could also see them maybe going for some futures to then flip those futures for a player of similar caliber to Rossi. I think teams are looking at maybe a 7x7 deal for him. I don't think Minnesota wants to go in that direction, even though they have
Bill
a little
Guerin
bit
wants to get bigger. He wants them to be more rugged and he wants size. Because on paper, if you look at just his stats and his underlyings, they're pretty good. There's nothing on Rossi's profile over the last year and a half.
He has 100 points these last 2 years. I don't want to use just counting stats, but he's been a fairly effective player for them.
And he's still growing. This is a guy who really had a rough go of it those first 2 years after being drafted, dealt with really bad long COVID, effectively didn't play hockey for a full year before going to the Iowa Wild and building himself back up. That's a player you take a gamble on if you're a good team. And that's kind of the frustrating part. And real quick on the Rangers and Peterka, the one thing I will say, I don't think an offer sheet would work per se because they don't have their second round pick at the moment. If they make the offer sheet for the price point below, it would be a first and a third. And I think Buffalo would match that number for the number. I think it goes up to 7.1 million is the is the tier on the offer sheet compensation for first to third. If the Rangers wanted to go to that next tier up, they would need to get their second round pick back from Utah to do that. That's why I floated, is there a world where the Rangers can get that pick and one of the Utah forwards, whether it's McKelly, Barrett Hayden, Jared McBain, whatever, and something else like a fifth or a sixth round pick in return for Keandre Miller, who they seem to be done with. And I don't like giving up on guys in their mid-20s who have shown flashes of being.
And it sounds like they might give Gavrikov a whole bunch of term and a whole bunch of money for reasons.
Well, no, the reason. He's big, he's tall, he has good and look, Gavrikov is a decent hockey player. This is not a Ben Sherratt situation in Detroit. Like Gavrikov's coming off of a really good defensive
probably
season.
The second best season of his career, in my opinion, but can he replicate that for the entirety of the year?
He absolutely won't.
No, exactly.
LA was the best defensive team in the NHL in the regular season. The best. Second best, I would say, in the whole league after Florida in terms of just overall profile. Gavrikov is going to a Rangers team that was bottom 5 in high danger chances against and expected goals against. Even if he's playing with Adam Fox, and it's skill sets wise, it's a decent match. Gavrikov is the retriever, Fox is the puck mover. It should work. The problem is that's one defenseman, and the Rangers defense at large, other than Adam Fox, has not been good for a while. They've gotten by. I think they're a lot higher on the guys they have, like Braden Schneider, to a lesser extent Will Borgen and Urho Vakanainen. But you look at that Rangers team, and they are so much more than one defenseman away from being serious contenders again, let alone just a good team. Can they be a playoff team with the defensive group if they add Gavrikov? Yeah, probably, but they're not getting past the second round with that team. The defense just is too much of a liability. But we need to take our second and final break. Coming up next, we will hit on Trevor Zegras, Evander Kane, Jonathan Toews, and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On NHL. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rougiette Ready. Rougiette Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rougiette's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in as little as 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rougiette might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. It is entirely online. Rougiette connects you with a board-certified doctor and ships your treatment discreetly to your door, and you can read real customer reviews on their websites for peace of mind. Head to rougiette.com/LockedOnNHL and use code LockedOnNHL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNHL and use promo code LockedOnNHL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rougiette website for full safety information. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out with Hunter and I on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL as we break down the chaos. So let's start with Zegras, because I think this is really interesting on a few different levels. Number one, it signals the Flyers want to try.
Yes.
It signals the Flyers are trying to find whatever the core of their team is going to be going forward. On paper, I like their group. That's a nice mix of young forwards. You've still got Konechny floating around. You've still got Sean Couturier, who's still reasonably effective. They probably need one more top six guy to feel good about that group. But Zegras, Matvei Michkov, the defense they're slowly piecing together. They definitely need a goalie who has more experience for me to feel good about that group. But this shows that Danny Briere isn't just interested in perpetually kicking the can down the road. And like we were saying before about K'Andre Miller and the restricted free agent class in general, this is the type of gamble you take when you're in this middle class of team. The Flyers finished last in the Metro this past season. It won't take that much to be competitive. And the Flyers aren't asking Rick Tocchet in that group to be Stanley Cup contenders next year. But you add a top six forward in there who's got a little of offensive flair, who needs his confidence rebuilt. You could do far worse than dropping Trevor Zegras onto a team and saying, hey, man, you got the season. If things go well for you, there's a future for you here. And that's the type of risk you want to see if you're a Flyers fan, that they're not just perpetually trading guys. Because I know a lot of Flyer fans were very upset that they traded Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee, because those were supposed to be building block guys. And losing those two, replacing with Zegras, okay, you have shown me, okay, those were not the types of guys you wanted, but we are still trying to build our team.
And Trevor Zegras was the classic case of, I need a change of scenery, because it wasn't working out with the Ducks. They were asking him to do things, Nick, that he was just obviously uncomfortable by. When you watch him on the ice, it looked like at times that he really didn't even want to be playing in a couple of the games that I watched against the Penguins especially. It looked like he was just kind of gliding around out there. But now he'll have a new opportunity with the Flyers to, play center. Obviously, that was one thing that Pat Verbeek said, was that he really wanted to play center. Didn't feel like there was a fit there anymore on the Ducks. So they're trading him to a Flyers team where, hey, you can never have enough centers, especially if you're a team like the Flyers. And, they'll give him good, top 9 minutes. They'll give him time on the power play. I just think it's a much better fit for him for what they want to do under Rick Tocchet compared to the Ducks. We all know the Ducks want to try to be aggressive this summer. We'll have to see if they do. They keep talking about the playoffs. I think it's a little rich right now, in my opinion. The Flyers, Do I have them as a playoff team right now going into next season? Probably not, but I think they're going to be a bit better. And they still have, quite a bit of the summer to go to see if they maybe add another defenseman to the roster, if they add another goalie, add some more help for their top 9. I like Matt Michkov, of course. But, that was a really shrewd move, I thought, for Danny Briere and the Flyers. There was no reason not to make that trade. You really didn't give up much of anything outside of a top 45 pick in this year's draft. So that's a slam dunk for me every day.
On top of that, we can talk about the Evander Kane trade, which, as we alluded to in the last segment, I don't know what the Canucks are doing, man. Just straight up, I do not see the vision.
Again, you're helping a division rival for no reason. You're taking on that guy's whole salary.
It's short term. It's not a serious financial commitment, but at the same time, Evander Kane's got one tool in his toolbox. He's an above average shooter. He's not that fast. He doesn't facilitate in any discernible way. He's actively bad defensively, and he takes too many penalties. Can he be a functional player on a good team? Yeah. I think if you're a good team and Evander Kane's on your third line, your second power play, you're a pretty good team. My expectation is the Canucks are going to slide him into their top 6 and say, can you score 30 goals for us this year? This is a guy who hasn't played a full season in 2 years now, coming off of an okay playoffs, but as the playoffs went along, his effectiveness started to wane. Against Florida, you saw him lose his cool more than once. If you're the Oilers, great. You got a draft pick and you didn't need to give an asset away on top of it as a sweetener. You need that cap space, like we talked about before, to sign to account for Draisaitl's extension and to sign Evan Bouchard. They need to create more space. We talked about Arvidsson. I definitely think Arvidsson's going to be moved at some point in the next week or so. But great move for Edmonton. For Vancouver, you got a crappier version of Brock Besser.
I'm just fascinated to see what Rutherford and Alvin do the rest of this offseason. When Jim Rutherford is in charge of your team, it's never boring. I say that firsthand as someone who watched him go on a 12 to 18 month heater with the Penguins, helped them get 2 Stanley Cups, banners hang forever. And then he completely lost the plot afterwards and tried to chase Tom Wilson around because Tom Wilson lived rent free in his head. I am stoked to see what else the Canucks have in store. Quinn Hughes, man, if they don't get better this offseason, that tampering stuff that Rutherford and Alvin discussed during that press conference might become legit here pretty soon. But hey, I'm excited to see what else they do. And I'm also hyped to see what else we get here this week, just to wrap this up. We keep hearing, though, Nick, the draft could get crazy. The draft could get crazy. Man, I'll believe it when I see it. Elliot, you can put that out there if you want. Pierre LeBrun, all these other insiders. I will believe it when I see it when it comes to the draft getting crazy. Yes, I know the top 10 this year, it's wildly different depending on who else you ask. But I still need to see a team actually make a big trade and see it before I actually believe these insiders when they say there could be something really big going on in the top 10 and all that stuff. But I think you're going to see hopefully some decent trades this weekend. And then I think next week, though, with free agency, you'll definitely see some more deals next week.
And then real quick, if the Jets are seriously expecting Jonathan Toews, who hasn't played hockey in 2 years, to be their second line center next year, I mean, what are we doing here?
Nick, apparently they're using him as a recruiting pitch for Nick Ehlers. Okay.
I don't see the vision there. Could Toews be an effective NHLer? Sure. But he's a third or fourth line center, second penalty kill guy. He's not going to meaningfully drive play. He's not a quality facilitator at this point. And if he hits those incentives, they're going to be paying him $6 million next year. If they make the playoffs and he plays, I think it's 70, 80% of the regular season games. That contract is crazy to me. I get it on face value, hometown guy, last hurrah, all the narrative stuff. But from a hockey perspective, wouldn't you rather just run Nemesnikov as the 2C again and spend that money on Ehlers? Wouldn't you rather just have Ehlers than because Nemesnikov, though flawed as a second line center, he's probably better than Jonathan Toews is now. And he's not going to cost $5.5, $6 million the same way Toews is going to. Sure. Could they rip the cord 20 games in if he stinks? Yes. I don't think they're going to do that, though. I don't think they're going to want to embarrass the guy and say, hey, man, you stink, get off the team. But it's going to create a really awkward situation there where if he's playing badly, the fans are going to say, you got to sit him. Otherwise, he's going to count more against the cap the following season.
I just don't know what to expect from him just because he hasn't played hockey in so long.
2 years is a long time.
It is. And I know we just saw Gabe Landeskog come back, and that was such a remarkable story for the Colorado Avalanche, and he was very effective for them once he came back. But are we going to get the same from Toews? I don't know. I think he can give you third, fourth line minutes, but I just want to see how he plays in those first few games back to really get a feel for what they can expect for full season, just because he hasn't played in so long. I will say though, Nick, story's pretty cool. Hometown guy going to play for the hometown team, but I just don't know what to expect. That's the thing.
It's weird from a hockey perspective is the way I would describe it politely. They're asking a lot of a guy who we have no idea what he's going to bring to the table next year. And this is a team that's very much in its Stanley Cup contention window. And every year you're not maximizing the Hellebuck and Morrissey contracts. You're missing out on the boat, and that's really unfortunate. Yeah. So they really need to hope Toews comes back and plays well. But that will do it for this week's edition of Locked On NHL. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button. Let us know what moves you've liked the most so far, what moves you're anticipating to happen over the next few weeks.